The Last Voyage of the Demeter. A Chronicle of England's Fall. Prologue, The Arrival. The sea was a black mouth, yawning wide beneath the ashen sky. The Demeter came in with the tide, a spectre adrift, her sails torn to rags, her hull clawed by the merciless teeth of the ocean. She ran aground upon the rocks below Whitby's east cliff with a scream like a wounded beast, and then was still. The townsfolk, gathering along the windswept shore, whispered among themselves, for there was no answering cry from the ship, no call for aid, no signal of distress. Only the broken mast, creaking in the bitter wind. When at last they dared approach fishermen first, then magistrates and curious onlookers, they found a sight to chill the stoutest heart. The deck was empty. The lifeboats hung untouched. The cargo holds, when pried open, yielded only stacks of rough-hewn crates, each packed with damp earth, each marked with foreign glyphs none could read. And at the wheel, lashed with cruel, frozen rope, was the captain. Dead. Eyes open, mouth twisted in a final grimace against the storm. Hands locked to the wheel as if steering the ship into hell itself. In his jacket was found a tattered logbook, pages water-stained and clotted with salt. The last entries, written in a shaking hand, spoke of a creeping fear aboard, of men vanishing without a trace, of a shadow glimpsed in the hold, and of a dread the captain could neither name nor resist. No other soul was found. No blood, no footprints, no bodies save his own. Only the smell faint but undeniable of earth turned wrong and sour under the open sky. The authorities, baffled, ordered the ship searched and the cargo catalogued. The crates, heavy and cold to the touch, were removed and stored in the warehouses along the wharves, awaiting claim by unseen owners. It did not take long before the coaches began to arrive. At first in ones and twos, then in a steady procession, black-cloaked drivers, silent and grim, their carriages bearing no crests, no names. Under cover of darkness, the crates were loaded and carried away, not by law nor by permission, but by arrangements none dared question. Some went to the crumbling manors along the Thames. Some vanished into the twisting alleys of London. Some were never seen again, their destinations swallowed by the black heart of the city. And so, unknowingly, England opened its arms to the children of the grave. Above the town, the ruined abbey watched in silent vigil, the crows gathering thick upon its broken walls. That night, as the winds rose and the first black fingers of storm clawed across the moon, the tide dragged the broken Demeter further up the rocks, her timbers groaning like the voice of something vast and wounded beneath the waves. And as the first rain fell thin, sharp, stinging, none among the living knew that England's veins had already been opened, and the old darkness begun to flow anew. The tide has carried more than wreckage to our shores. Chapter 1, The First Nights. At first, it was nothing. A missing coachman. A housemaid who failed to return from an errand. A beggar found cold in the gutter, pale as wax, his throat bearing marks too faint for certainty. The constables of Whitby recorded the incidents without alarm. In any port town, disappearances and sudden deaths were the cost of daily life, paid without comment to the tides and the alehouses alike. But soon, the pattern grew. Children refused to play in the alleys after dusk, claiming shapes moved their tall shapes that breathed without sound. The dogs barked without ceasing at empty doorways, their hackles high. Shopkeepers whispered of strangers who passed without casting shadows, of customers whose reflections wavered like mist upon a mirror. A seamstress was found in the market square one morning, her skin drawn tight as parchment, her lips frozen in a final, soundless plea. No blood, no wound, no sign of struggle. Only the fear still clinging to her face like a veil. The apothecaries offered no comfort. They brewed their tonics and burned their herbs, but the sickness, if sickness it was, did not heed the remedies of man. It slipped between shutters. It clung to the mist. It spread like smoke in the lungs of the living. Within the fortnight, whole streets fell silent after sundown. The lamps guttered low. The church bells tolled more often, each sombre note marking another loss. The magistrates spoke of foul air, of foreign fevers carried upon the sea winds. The clergy preached of judgment, calling for repentance and prayer. But in the taverns and the parlours, behind bolted doors, the people whispered the older fears. They spoke of the shipwreck. They spoke of the broken crates, the earth that smelled wrong even to the dogs. They spoke of the man lashed to the wheel, who had sailed dead into England's heart. They spoke of the fog thick now each night, clinging to the streets like a living thing, and of the eyes sometimes glimpsed within it, burning faintly red before vanishing into the swirling dark. And when they dared name the terror that crept among them, they did not speak it aloud. They traced a cross upon their chests and turned their faces from the windows. Outside, the fog grew thicker. The winds carried strange smells inland from the harbour, damp, metallic, and sweet as spoiled wine. And in the shadows, something deeper than mist moved with silent hunger. When the night deepens, something deeper still walks within it. Chapter 2, The Bite. Arthur Holmwood was not a fearful man. In younger days, he had hunted stag through the misty woods of Yorkshire and crossed swords with brigands on the roads of Italy. Fear was a thing he had worn like a cloak and cast aside when the danger passed. But now, as he made his way along the deserted lanes near Whitby's Lower Market, he felt it coil around his heart with a cold and certain hand. The fog was thicker tonight than any he could remember, a living wall that pressed close against his skin, damp and heavy. He had meant only to call briefly at the apothecary, but the streets had seemed to shift behind him, and now, though he walked briskly, each turn only led him deeper into the unmapped dark. Somewhere ahead, a faint sound stirred the air. A low humming, a melody without words, rising and falling with a rhythm that tugged at the blood like a distant drumbeat. Arthur quickened his step, cursing himself for a fool. But the fog parted. And she stood before him. A woman, or something like it, draped in a gown that clung to her body like smoke, her face hidden beneath a veil of black lace. She did not move. She did not speak. Only the sound of the humming grew louder, threading itself into the hollow of his chest. Arthur opened his mouth to demand, to challenge, to flee, he could not have said, but no sound came forth. He felt it then, a pull in the marrow of his bones, in the heat of his blood. A longing so fierce it stole reason from him in an instant. The veiled woman lifted one hand and beckoned. His feet obeyed before his mind could resist. Closer now he could see the pale gleam of her throat, the suggestion of a smile behind the veil, sweet and terrible as the first kiss of fever. Her arms enfolded him with a strength that belied her slight form. He felt her breath upon his neck, cold, impossibly cold, and then pain. Not a sudden blow, but a slow, burrowing agony. The delicate breaking of skin. The invasion of something sharp and sure and unrelenting. Arthur gasped, a sound swallowed by the fog as she drank. The world swayed. Each pull of her mouth was a theft, a hollowing, a claiming. He felt his strength ebb, not merely from his limbs but from his very soul. And worse, far worse, he felt pleasure coil around the pain, a blasphemous sweetness that made him lean closer into her embrace, even as his heart faltered. When at last she withdrew, it was with a slow, reluctant grace, as though savouring the final drops of some rare and precious vintage. Arthur staggered. The woman stepped back, her veil fluttering like black wings. For a moment, he glimpsed her face, not the beauty he had feared, but something older, crueler, a face both living and dead, smiling with a hunger that would never be sated. Then she was gone, swallowed by the mist, leaving only the pulsing agony at his throat, the weakness in his knees, the growing hunger in his own mouth. Arthur Holmwood fell to one knee in the street, unseen by the shuttered houses around him, and wept without knowing why. Above him, the fog closed like a fist, and the night watched in silence. The blood remembers. Even when you do not. Chapter 3, The Gathering. The summons was delivered by hand, written in Van Helsing's tight, slanted script, "Come at once. No delay. No excuses. Bring the journals. Bring the maps." The appointed meeting was held beneath St. Mary's Church, in a crypt seldom used in living memory, a place of broken stones and thin air, where the dead rested uneasily and the rats fled from unseen things. Jonathan Harker arrived first, his coat wet with the clinging mist, his face drawn tight with weariness. Then Dr. Seward, paler than when last seen, his eyes shadowed by sleepless nights and troubling patience. Arthur Holmwood came last, moving stiffly, a scarf pulled high about his throat despite the oppressive closeness of the underground vault. Van Helsing stood waiting, a tall figure cloaked in black, a lamp guttering at his feet. He wasted no time on greetings. "You have seen it yourselves," he said, his voice low, clipped. "The disappearances? The deaths? The unnatural fog?" Jonathan nodded grimly. "And more than that," Van Helsing pressed. "You have felt it. Tell me, Mr. Harker, when you walk alone at night, do you not sense a presence just beyond the edge of sight?" "I have," Harker admitted, his voice rough. "But I thought it only fatigue." Van Helsing's mouth tightened into a line of grim satisfaction. "And you, Dr. Seward?" Seward hesitated, a man of science clinging to the last rags of reason, and then bowed his head. "Something moves in this town," he said. "Something that does not fear man's walls or prayers." Holmwood said nothing. Van Helsing's sharp gaze fell upon him. "You are unwell, Arthur," he said. Holmwood smiled thinly. "Merely a touch of the fever going around," he said, though his hand trembled at his side, unseen but not unnoticed. Van Helsing allowed the lie to stand, for now. He turned, spreading a map across a cracked stone table. "Every incident," he said, tapping points marked in red ink, "clusters near the harbor. Near the shipwreck." "The Demeter," Harker said. "The Demeter," Van Helsing agreed. "A vessel that brought more than salt and sorrow to our shores." He straightened, the lamp casting stark shadows across his seamed face. "I tell you now what you have already begun to suspect: this is no plague of natural cause. It is a plague of the blood, of the spirit. A curse carried upon black wings." "A vampire," Harker said, voice low. Van Helsing did not blink. "Many vampires," he said. "Not one, but a legion, sown into England's heart like seeds into furrowed soil." The silence that followed was thick as the damp air. Jonathan Harker gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. Dr. Seward closed his eyes briefly, gathering strength. Arthur Holmwood swayed slightly where he stood. Van Helsing spoke on, relentless. "Before this is ended, many more will die. Perhaps all. But if there is a chance, even the faintest, to stem the tide, we must take it. We must find them. We must destroy them. Root and branch. And if we fail?" Seward asked quietly. Van Helsing looked at him then, not with cruelty, but with the cold honesty of a man who has already counted the cost. "Then England will fall," he said. "And with her, the world." The lamp guttered and nearly died, the flame bending low under an unseen breath. For a moment, it seemed that even the dead walls of the crypt listened. Above, in the distant streets, the fog pressed heavier against the glass of windows, and something unseen smiled in the dark. Even the brave must bow their heads before the first blow falls. Chapter 4, The Names of the Fallen. It was Van Helsing who first began to name them. Not lightly, never lightly, but with the gravity of a man setting down an obituary for a world not yet dead. We must know our enemies, he said, his fingers trembling upon the yellowed pages of ancient texts. For there is power in names and greater danger in ignorance. Thus the ledger was begun. Lord Shekay of the Broken Tooth. An ancient horror, older than the first Crusades. A nobleman once, before the thirst hollowed him into a thing of jagged hunger. He made his lair beneath the shattered remains of St. Dunstan's church, gathering the lost and the dying to him like a shepherd gathers sheep. Those he fed upon were not found pale and drained, but torn, their bodies mutilated as though by wild beasts, yet left arranged in grotesque parodies of devotion around his altar. Lady Mirella of the Ashen Veil. A courtesan of forgotten empires, clothed forever in mourning black. She drifted through the East End's marketplaces like a wraith, her face hidden behind gauze, her laughter a soft, cold thing that turned the blood to ice. Her victims were often found sitting upright at their tables, their cups of tea untouched, their eyes staring blankly into nothingness, the mark of her kiss invisible, but absolute. Gregor Sobor, the Wolf Hand. A brute of terrible legend, once a mercenary in the darkest corners of Eastern Europe. His hands, twisted and gnarled, bore claws like iron. He roamed the narrow alleys of Whitechapel, where even the night watchman dared not follow, dragging the living from their beds with a strength no mortal thing could match. His howls echoed across the rooftops, answered sometimes though God preserve us by others. Brother Nicholas of the Severed Tongue. A monk who had turned from his order in a time so ancient that only his own cursed memory recalled it. In penance or in defiance he had torn out his own tongue, yet even so, his mouth writhed with a black worm-like growth that spoke words no human ear should endure. He haunted the cloisters and nunneries, profaning the holy with each silent passage, his presence marked by a sudden stillness in the air and a weeping of stone. The twins of Visegrad. Appearing as children no older than 9, yet ancient beyond counting. Their hair was white as snow, their eyes gleamed red as coals banked under ash. They played games in the graveyards at night, their laughter carrying over the fog-wrapped tombs. Those who heard their riddles and failed to answer rightly were found at dawn, their faces frozen in expressions of horror so profound that even death could not erase it. Thus were they named, one by one, not all, but enough to chill the blood and turn resolve to ash. England had become a charnel house. The old order, law, prayer, reason had no hold on these things. And against such an army, what could a handful of broken men hope to achieve? Van Helsing closed his ledger with a snap that echoed in the dim chamber. He lifted his head, his face carved in shadow and grim certainty. "Remember their names," he said. "And pray you never hear them called in the dark." Outside, the fog deepened, and the whispered names were carried upon the breath of the dying wind. Some names are better left unspoken. Some never forget the one who spoke them. Chapter 5, The Black Days. The sun did not rise. At first, men spoke of peculiar weather, of clouds and mist and the unseen hand of the season turning foul. But the days wore on and still, the light did not return. The mornings were no brighter than midnight. The fog thickened into a wall that swallowed buildings, streets, men. The lamps burned all hours, throwing their feeble glow against a sky that had turned the color of rotted bone. Ships no longer put to sea. The crops withered in their fields. The bells of the churches tolled, but their sound was muffled and strange, as if the air itself conspired to hush all prayers. In the cities, men huddled together behind bolted doors, clutching crucifixes and relics, burning incense that failed to sweeten the stench of fear. In the countryside, villages were abandoned overnight, fields left strewn with the tools of laborers who would never return. The vampires moved openly now. They had no need to hide under the cloaks of mist and moon. The world had turned to their liking, grey, heavy, hungering. It was said that Lord Shekay's flock had grown so numerous that the ruins of St. Dunstan's throbbed like a single great heart beneath the earth. Lady Mirella's laughter could be heard rolling across the deserted markets, a low, silken sound that promised death sweeter than life. Gregor Sobor, the wolf hand, dragged his victims through the empty streets by moonlight, leaving trails of blood that no rain came to wash away. Even the children no longer played in the graveyards, for the twins of Visegrad had made their playgrounds there, and those who strayed too close never returned whole, if they returned at all. The people whispered, those who dared still whisper, of legends older than Christendom, older than the stones beneath their feet. They spoke of a time, long forgotten, when darkness had nearly consumed the world once before. And they spoke, haltingly, fearfully, of the silver rains. A cleansing rain, it was said. A rain finer than spider's silk, silver as molten stars, falling not from clouds, but from the breaking heart of heaven itself. A rain that would scour away all corruption, all filth, all memory of sin, but at a price none could predict, and none might survive. Even among the vampires, the legend lingered. A memory carried in their ancient blood, of a time when cities fell not to fire or sword, but to light. It was said that even Dracula himself, the prince among them, the breaker of empires, paused at times to glance skyward, as if feeling some distant tremor in the vault of heaven. But no silver fell. Only the black mist, the endless grey rain, the silence that smothered prayer and song alike. The candles burned lower. The last bells faded into the heavy dark. And somewhere just beyond hearing, the earth itself seemed to tremble with waiting. When the last candle dies, listen. It is not silence you will hear. Chapter 6, The Relic Unearthed. There was no light in the pit but what they carried with them. The last of them, Van Helsing, Harker, Seward, and Homewood, descended into the broken earth, the crumbling mouth of a forgotten ruin yawning wide at the edge of the abandoned city. And with them, cloaked and silent, walked Mina Van Helsing, the professor's daughter, her hair bound tightly, her hands steady despite the tremor in the ground beneath their feet. They moved through tunnels choked with rubble and bone. The walls wept brackish water. The air grew colder with every step, not the cold of the winter's bite, but the cold of deep things sleeping where no prayers reached. Van Helsing led, his crucifix held high, but even he hesitated when the final chamber opened before them, a cavern hewn by no human hand, vast and raw, its ceiling lost in darkness. In the center stood the relic. At first glance, it was a figure of marble white as fresh bone, gleaming faintly in the meager light of their lanterns. A woman, or the memory of one, her arms outstretched in supplication or in warning, her face veiled by cracked stone. She was beautiful and she was wrong. From beneath the tattered hem of her robe emerged not human feet, but cloven hooves, delicate yet unmistakable, the marks of something born before man learned to shape gods in his own image. Her hands were graceful, her posture noble, but there was a tension in her form, a coiled violence, as if she might step from her plinth at any moment and speak in a voice that would split the living world in two. Seward shuddered, and took a step back. Harker crossed himself, then hesitated, as if uncertain whether such gestures had any power here. Only Mina stood still. Her gaze locked upon the relic, unblinking, as if she heard a sound none of the others could perceive. Van Helsing's voice broke the heavy silence. "This is no saint of our making," he said, his voice barely more than a breath. "This is older. Far older." Homewood, pale and trembling, pulled his scarf tighter around his throat, as though the cold now gnawed at him from within. "What would you have us do?" Harker whispered. Van Helsing approached the plinth with reverence and dread, drawing forth a vial of sacred oil from his coat. "We wake her," he said. "Or we perish with the rest." The oil was poured at the base of the statue. Ancient words, not found in any priest's book, spilled from Van Helsing's lips old syllables that tasted of iron and ash. The lanterns guttered. The ground shuddered. The air grew thick with the scent of burning stone. Mina fell to her knees without a word, her hands pressed to the earth, her body trembling. Above her, the relic seemed to stir. From beneath the veil, the faintest shimmer of moisture, not sweat, not blood but silver tears, welling at the corners of the cracked eyes. The first teardrop clung for a moment trembling, then fell, striking the stone floor with a sound like a bell tolling at the bottom of the sea. The pit grew darker still. The very walls seemed to lean inward, listening. Homeward gasped, a soft, broken sound. For the relic had not moved. And yet the weight of her gaze pressed upon them all, crushing, measuring, judging. Mina looked up, her face bathed in the sickly light, her eyes wide with a strange sorrow. Van Helsing reached for her, but the ground split beneath his feet with a deep groan, and the chamber trembled on the edge of collapse. The relic remained. Watching. Waiting. And the first true hope, if hope it was, had stirred at last. Not all who kneel before the sacred are spared. Chapter 7, The Confrontation. He came without sound. One moment the air hung thick with the scent of broken stone and oil, the next, the darkness at the cavern's mouth thickened and took form. Dracula. Not as the man they once glimpsed across drawing rooms or windswept cliffs, but as he truly was, a figure tall and terrible, wrapped in a blackness deeper than the fog, his eyes burning faintly red through the gloom, like coals banked in ancient ash. The survivors stood frozen. Even Van Helsing, armed with relics and prayer, could only lift his crucifix with a trembling hand, the words of exorcism dying in his throat. Dracula moved forward, step by step, unhurried, inevitable, like a tide come to reclaim the shore. And there, at the center of the broken pit, stood the relic. The veiled marble figure gleamed faintly in the sickly light, her cloven hooves half sunken into the weeping stone. She waited, her arms outstretched, as though welcoming both damnation and salvation without distinction. Dracula paused before her. For a long moment, nothing moved. And then a flicker. Not fear, no, never that, but recognition. A memory older than the pyramids, older than flood and fire, stirred in the depths of his corrupted soul. The silver rains. He had known them once. Had fled them once. Had survived, when others of his kind had not. The relic, cracked and veiled, tilted her head as if regarding him through eyes that had seen the first light of the world. And from those eyes, without force, without violence, fell the first silver tear. It struck the stone floor with a sound like a bell tolling deep beneath the ocean. The air grew thin. The second tear fell, tracing a clean line through the grime that streaked the marble cheek. Mina Van Helsing gasped, clutching her chest, for she felt the pull, the ancient call of blood to blood, of servant to master, of soul to the abyss that had once ruled all flesh. Dracula's head turned sharply toward her. For a heartbeat, a terrible, aching heartbeat, Mina felt the tug at the very root of her being, a call older than her father's prayers, older than the books of men. Her veins thrummed. Her breath caught. He could have claimed her in that moment, claimed her utterly. But his gaze returned to the relic. The third silver tear fell. And with it came a change. The earth trembled. The lanterns shuddered. The black mist recoiled as if stung. A spark, the faintest, smallest glimmer, stirred in the heart of the world. And Dracula knew that if he did not act, the rains would fall again. The end would come not in blood, but in a purity no darkness could endure. With a roar that split the cavern, he struck. His hand, pale, clawed, strong enough to tear the hearts from kings, smashed against the relic with all the fury of an ancient god cast down. The marble cracked not as stone cracks, but as something living, something breathing, something ancient and weary. The relic shattered. Fragments of her veil, her hands, her hooves, rained down upon the blood-stained floor. The silver tears, spilled across the stones, soaked into the earth like blood into thirsty soil. And in that instant, time stopped. The world itself held its breath. The cavern hung suspended between one heartbeat and the next, between the death of one age and the birth of another. Even the dust hung motionless in the air. The living could not speak. The dead could not move. The darkness could not feed. Only the broken relic remained, her pieces gleaming faintly in the stillness, the silver tears still shimmering in the cracks she left behind. And somewhere, far above the cavern, the first true tremor stirred in the sleeping heavens. When the world holds its breath, know it is not for your salvation. Chapter 8, The First Storm. The stillness shattered with a sound like the tearing of the world's own skin. The broken pieces of the relic seemed to pulse, as if breathing their last breath, and from the cracks in the stone floor, a golden mist began to rise thick, suffocating, gleaming as if lit from within by a terrible sun. Above, the heavens split. Not with rain. Not with snow. But with fire. The first bolts of lightning, vast and jagged, struck the earth with such force that the stones beneath the survivors' feet leapt into the air. The wind screamed a voice not of any living thing, but of the earth itself, torn from slumber. And then the rain fell, a rain of molten gold, heavy and scalding, burning through the mist, setting the very ground to steam. The survivors fled, stumbling blindly through the crumbling tunnels, as the cavern collapsed behind them in roaring waves of dust and thunder. The black mist was torn apart by the rising storm, shredded and flung across the ruins like a dying beast. When they emerged into the open, the world was no longer a world. It was a battlefield of the elements, stripped of all reason and mercy. The skies boiled, black and gold, swirling in vast whirlpools above the land. Torrents of burning rain lashed the countryside, scarring the hills, splitting the trees to their roots. Towers toppled. Church steeples bent and fell. The rivers flooded their banks, washing away villages like sandcastles before a tidal wave. In the streets of London, the vampires ran, howling not in rage, but in panic. They clawed at the stones, at the doorways, at the very earth, seeking shelter from a storm that recognized no master. And yet the golden rain did not spare the living. Men and women fled screaming through the burning streets, their clothes smoldering, their flesh blistered by the furious rain. Whole districts disappeared under waves of flame and water, leaving behind only twisted wreckage and scorched bones. Above it all, at the heart of the maelstrom, stood Dracula. He alone did not run. He stood tall upon the broken stones, his cloak torn to ribbons, his hair streaming behind him like a banner of defiance. He raised his face to the golden rain and bared his teeth not in terror, but in fury. This was not yet the death he feared. This was chaos blind and wild, a golden death storm that slew without thought, without justice, without purity. It was not the silver rain. Not yet. But it would come. He could feel it, stirring deep beneath the boiling heavens, waiting for the storm to spend its blind rage. And in that moment, as the fires spread and the cities crumbled, even the Prince of Darkness knew that his dominion was slipping. The earth itself had begun to rebel against him. And no crown forged of blood would save him when the second rain fell. When the skies break, pray you are too small to be seen. Chapter 9, The True Spark. The golden storm burned itself to exhaustion. Its fury, vast and blind, tore at the world until nothing remained but scorched fields, broken towers, and a sky that bled lightless smoke across the ruined horizon. And in that silence, that breathless, waiting silence, the second spark awoke. It rose from the shattered remains of the relic, unseen but undeniable. A trembling thread of light finer than a hair, pure as the first breath of morning. It wound its way upward, unseen by mortal eyes, piercing the heavy clouds, slicing through the wreckage of the heavens. The air itself seemed to draw inward, the winds stilled, the fires guttered low, the world caught between destruction and deliverance. And then the first silver drop fell. It was so light, so fine, that at first none knew it had begun. A sound like the sigh of a newborn child, softer than the memory of rain. The first drops struck the scorched stones and steamed. Where they fell upon the blackened ground, the soil hissed and shuddered, as if breathing its last. The vampires, who had weathered the golden storm by claw and fang, lifted their heads at once. Some ran blindly, stumbling, their pride and terror laid bare. Some fell to their knees, keening, clutching their faces as the silver mist found them. Where it touched them, their flesh burned white hot. Their bodies dissolved not into flame, but into ash so fine it drifted upward into the silver air like lost souls. Gregor Sobor, the wolf hand, was the first to fall, his monstrous form collapsing into a steaming ruin as the rain touched his skin. Then Lady Mirella, who had once worn the beauty of centuries like a shield, shrieked as her gauze veil caught the droplets and melted into her flesh. The twins of Visegrad tried to flee into the old graveyards, laughing no longer, but the silver followed them even into the cracks of the earth, leaving only stillness behind. Even Dracula staggered. The rain struck him like 1,000 knives, not with the fury of the golden storm, but with a precision more terrible, seeking out the hidden wounds of memory, the old scars of defiance that no time had healed. He raised his arms against the sky, roaring his rage into the falling light. But rage was not enough. The silver rain fell through him, into him, through every hollow place he had carved into the world, and he knew that no shadow, no oath, no blood claim could shield him now. But it was not only the damned who fell. The innocent, too, were judged. Those who had harbored the dark unknowingly, those whose souls had been tainted by fear, by despair, by weakness, found themselves marked. Arthur Holmwood was among them. The rain touched him gently at first, beading on his brow like a blessing. For a moment, he gasped, and the scar upon his throat shone white as bone. Then, with a soft sigh, almost a sigh of relief, he sank to his knees among the silvered fields, and was still. He had not fully turned, the curse within him had not yet claimed his soul. And so, in the end, it was mercy that the rain gave him, the quiet mercy of cleansing. The silver rain touched them gently, but it touched them all the same. Mothers clutching children in the ruins. Soldiers who had fought without hope. Priests who had prayed with doubt in their hearts. Some fell where they stood, their bodies folding into the earth without a sound. Some merely wept, not knowing why, as the rain washed over them, cleansing, yes, but also stripping away every pretense, every shield. The rain did not ask who deserved mercy. It asked only, what remains, when the lies are burned away? And it answered without hesitation. Above the shattered cities, the silver rain fell steady and fine, and England, old and broken, drank deep. When the rain touches your skin, remember, judgment wears many faces. Chapter 10, The Purification. The silver rain fell for 3 days and 3 nights. It fell without anger, without haste, without mercy. By the first dusk, the cities had gone silent. By the second dawn, the rivers ran clear, stripped of blood and filth. By the third night, there were no voices left to raise in sorrow or in song. The vampires were the first to perish. Those few who had survived the golden storm, who had hidden in crypts and hollowed earth, found no refuge from the silvered rain. It sought them out through stone, through soil, through the hollowed bones of old cathedrals. It touched them, and they were no more. No scream? No defiance? Only a brief sigh, like the extinguishing of a candle in an endless night. Dracula, who had once ruled empires with a glance, who had defied death itself, stood longest against the falling light. He clung to the crumbling walls of a ruined tower, his cloak in tatters, his body smoking where the rain touched. His cry was not of terror, nor of repentance, but of something older and more terrible, the rage of a king cast down not by sword, but by time itself. When at last he fell, it was not with thunder or flame, but with a slow, dissolving into dust that the rain carried away, grain by grain, until not even his shadow remained upon the stones. Thus ended the reign of the undead. Thus ended the long dominion of darkness. But the rain did not cease. It fell upon the fields, washing away the poisoned roots. It fell upon the seas, stripping the rot from the waves. It fell upon the bones of the dead and the hearts of the living alike, cleansing all without favor or pity. When at last the skies cleared, the world lay silent. The great cities were reduced to pale skeletons of stone. The fields were ash-grey and still. The forests were bare, their blackened branches reaching upward like the fingers of forgotten dead. But the air was clean. The rivers ran cold and sweet. The earth, though stripped and scarred, breathed again. Above, the sky was a deep, endless blue, the first pure blue it had known in an age. Those few who survived scattered, broken, silent emerged into this new world blinking, trembling, uncertain. They carried no banners. They sang no songs of victory. There were no triumphs to proclaim. Only the heavy, aching knowledge that something had ended and something else, nameless and fragile, had begun. They knelt in the white fields beneath the clear sky, and they wept. Not for the dead. Not for the old world. But for the chance small and terrible that they might yet build something that would not be forgotten, something that would not need to be burned away again. What is reborn must first be broken. Epilogue: The White Fields. The fields are white. Not with snow, nor with ash, but with a fine dusting of silver that clings to every blade of pale grass, every stone, every crumbling wall. The old world is a ghost. Cities lie buried beneath a carpet of silence, their bones softened by the patient hand of time. The rivers wander new courses through the plains, their banks no longer marked by the footprints of man. It has been many years since the last rain fell. Now, the land lies still, wrapped in a hush so complete that even the birds hesitate before breaking it. I walk alone. I do not know why I remain, whether by providence, by curse, or by some small, cruel mercy. There are others, scattered like seeds upon the wind, but they are few, and we do not speak much when we meet. There is little to say. The past lingers here not in monuments or in memory, but in the feel of the air, the way the light falls across the fields at dusk, the way the mist rises, faint and trembling, when the stars first blink open. Sometimes, when the wind turns cold, I hear voices. Not clear. Not near. A murmuring, like a river running deep beneath the earth, a river of old griefs, old names, old promises broken and kept. At the heart of the fields, stands a fragment of stone. White marble, cracked and half buried, weathered by rain and sun alike. It catches the light strangely, as if refusing to belong to the earth that now holds it. The last piece of the relic. The last memory of a world before ours, before even the one that fell. I kneel sometimes before it, though I do not pray. I think of those who knelt here long before me in hope, in fear, in desperation, and I wonder whether their prayers were answered, or whether they, too, were simply waiting for the rain. Above, the sky is clear, the deep, endless blue of a world washed clean by sorrow and fire. The white fields stretch on forever. And the wind carries no songs. Only the soft, silvered breath of memory. When the rain taps your window, do not open your eyes. Some awakenings are best left undreamt.